Hi everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my November wrap up. So, November was a month in which I didn't read. I guess I didn't read the books I normally read because the stats are a little bit off. I'll go into that in a little bit, but I first want to show you all the books I read, and I also read some very anticipated books or some very hyped books, and I will talk about those at the end because I have some thoughts. But these are all the physical books that I read in November. And let me just start off with the stats. And actually, no. Let me first talk about what happened in November, and then I'll do stats and I'll do books and whatever. So, in November, I know I told everyone that I was going to finish that cardigan, and I ran out of yarn. So I finished as much as I could. I ran out of yarn. I have to order more. This always happens to me where I think that I have enough yarn and then I'm missing one ball of yarn, and that's the case. In general, I made a bunch. I didn't necessarily make that many earrings. I baked a lot in October, but I needed to kind of finish them up. So I finished them up in November, and I brought a lot of them to Yalk. I will link down below my like TikTok vlog thing. Not even for Yalk, just the time I was in London because I didn't actually do that much filming for Yalk. It was exhausting and I felt like it went by in a blur. I feel like when you're in a large convention space and you're spending a lot of hours there, they kind of just all blend into one, in which you just feel like you've been walking the same loop forever and ever. I think this also has to be that I was hanging out for a little bit of the day on Saturday with James. I will link James's Instagram profile down below, and we were both looking for the cover reveal for the UK cover of A Forgery of Fate, and they had been hidden around the convention center. And we walked around, I feel like, for 2 hours looking for this. So that might contribute to that. Also, in November, I got my stool, which you may have seen on social media. A bunch of people saw it and texted me about it privately, wondering who my new roommate could be. It's that. It's my stool. I won that in a giveaway from the Frankfurt Book Fair from Hobbit Press, and that came, and I assembled it, and I made that video. So I'll link that down below. And in general, November was just really stressful. I finished up my panel season, so I will also link all the panels down below. I went to Yalk and London, and I was getting prepared for the last month of the year, which is coming up very soon. So let me just start off with my stats. So I read 32 books, and of those books, 13% featured queer characters as main characters, and 28% of those featured characters of color as main characters. So that's awful. I think that's my first really bad fail of 2024. Fingers crossed for December, manifesting a lot better and a lot more diverse. I don't even know what it was. I was looking at like the books that I was reading, and I honestly don't even know why it was like this. And maybe I'm missing some because I didn't necessarily like put them all in at the time. I need to be better at putting them in immediately into my spreadsheet immediately after finishing. For me, I often do it like week or two basis, and then I forget a lot of things. And then for a lot of the arcs that you read, not a lot of the information about a book is going to be on Goodreads. So it just makes it a little bit difficult. But anyway, major fail. In terms of favorites, I want to chat about three. The first one is a romance book that I read, which is not in my book, which was so fun. I was reading this as I was traveling to London, and this was the best thing because, there were delays, there were long, long train rides. I had to wait half an hour at Heathrow for my train. And so I was reading not in my book, and it was just so fun. It's a really cute, like, enemies-ish, kind of like nemesis, rivals, sort of. It's hard to have an enemy, like, in a contemporary setting, but they were definitely nemesis or rivals to lovers. It's about two aspiring writers. It has a lot to do with kind of, like, one writer who feels very snobby and is like, romance is not really a real genre. The other writer, who is a romance writer, so not in my book, kind of talks about that as well. But it was just so fun. It's set in New York City, which is a nostalgic city for me. It's set around the Christmas time, so it's kind of like perfect read for coming up. And it comes out in December. So it's not yet out, but it comes out in December. And it was just super swoony. I also love when you can't tell the line between reality and fiction, and that is super blurred in Not in My Book, because they're writers, but they're also forced to co-write a class project together because they are just tearing each other apart in class. And the professor is like, you're either out of my class or you have to do this. So that was a perfect setup. And it was just so fun. I loved seeing the main character get sort of realize that, our misconceptions about a person are not necessarily what we think they are. If I recall correctly, Not in My Book is just from one perspective character, so it's just from the romance writer character, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of Rivals to Lovers, you see both perspectives. So that was something I really enjoyed too, but it also puts you more in the headspace of like trying to figure out why someone doesn't really like another person, and how that kind of rewrites everything that you think you might know about someone. It was comped to The Hating Game, which I didn't really like The Hating Game, but I really, really loved Not in My Book. So I kind of decided to read it because I saw that the author is doing an event with Chloe Gong in December for the launch, and so I definitely wanted to read it before launch. But I'm really glad I didn't let that The Hating Game comp turn me off of that book. I think it's mainly because they're just like rivals, and they don't work together in the sense that they're not in an office setting, they're in a school setting. But I think that's why there is that comp. The next one is Midnights with You, which I loved. I actually didn't really know too much going into this book, but it's a YA book about these two characters who are so deeply entrenched in making sense of, exploring, and navigating the trauma that they've inherited from their parents. And their parents were like consistently heaping more of that emotional abuse, emotional trauma onto their children. And it's kind of like, how do we have any relationship with our parents in that sense? And also, how do we escape that kind of generational cycle? That is a huge theme. It also has a theme of trying to come into our own. Also, Dee Dee, the main character, is really struggling to figure out the reasons why her mom is the way that she is and why she feels the way that she feels, her family secrets as well. But the ending is perfection. I will not tell you about the ending. It was unexpected, but it is perfection. And it's just such a beautiful story about working through our own issues and separating ourselves from the identity of our parents and like our parents' child, and kind of figuring out what it means to personally grow and to grow as a character, specifically in this YA time period. Fabulous. I loved it so much. And the last one I want to chat about is A Language of Dragons. I feel like I've been reading a lot of books. So I was recalling, or I was kind of thinking, Blood Over Bright Haven gives a similar vibe to A Language of Dragons as Babel. So all of these books have been kind of all comped to Babel in a variety of different ways. Mostly because Babel is kind of like taking down powers and systems of oppression in how do I like describe this for people who may not have read Babel? In like unexpected ways, when you're really deeply entrenched. There's a lot of trying to figure out the misinformation and the information in our world, and a lot of realizing that our world is not the way that we think it is. So I will link down below the October wrap-up so you can see what I thought about Blood Over Bright Haven, but I'm talking about A Language of Dragons, which specifically is also comped to Babel and Fourth Wing. It's comped to Fourth Wing because it is a magical sort of training school, I guess. Magical in the sense that there are dragons in this world, but it's not magical in the sense like they don't have necessarily any magical powers. It's more or less dragons in this world. And there is kind of a school academic learning setting. That comp is not very good. I'm just going to say that. The Babel comp is more on par, but to me, kind of like Blood Over Bright Haven and this one, A Language of Dragons, it's not necessarily comped to like the main character of Babel, for example, Robin. It's more comped to like the main character of, for example, Letty. For people who've read Babel, you know what I'm talking about. But A Language of Dragons and I love the author's note because that was really what set me up for the book. I don't know if they will be in the finished copies of books, but it was in the ARC. And I love that the author's note is about a main character who is so deeply struggling with the mistakes and has to learn that, like, if she also doesn't forgive herself, there is not really a way forward. And that was really a big theme in A Language of Dragons. But it is one of those books where, like, so much of the time you kind of just want to shake someone. Like, it's, you know how if you talk to someone and you're like, oh, whatever, like they would never do that. Or like the government, the school, the powerful institution, they would never do that. And you're like, are you serious right now? That was a little bit of the vibe in A Language of Dragons. It talks about kind of the importance of language within our world and what we kind of use language for. That's one element. The other element is obviously the dragons and the war and kind of the misinformation and propaganda within the government and within society. That's another thing. And it comes together to form this book, which is about kind of the way that language can be weaponized against and sort of for, right? It can be used as a weapon and it can be weaponized against people. I think that we see this a lot in the way that communities, cultures, oppressed people, their language is taken away from them, sort of weaponized in that sense. And so to me, that's kind of where the sort of comparisons were being made in Language of Dragons. I really like A Language of Dragons is one of those books where I just kept wanting to dive back into it every day. I had a really hard time in November. And so me wanting to like dive back into a book every day was definitely a thing that made me like a book stand out in my mind. As I think about that, I wanted to also mention another book which had that same exact vibe, and it is the last one. I kind of love this. There's so many spoilers with the last one. Basically, our main character kind of wakes up pseudo while being robbed and also doesn't remember who she is. And so everything kind of goes off of that initial event that happened in her life, but kind of waking up and not remembering. And so we have these sort of a palimpsest of her life and her things post waking up and her discovering all of these things. And they're kind of being rewritten over and over again about what kind of person she wants to be. And it's a similar thing where every day that I've woken up, I have wanted to read that book. Even if it's just a chapter, even if I'm super, super busy, I like want to know what's going to happen next. And I think what I love about that one is a lot of things that I can't talk about because there's spoilers, but there's elements of found family. There's also elements of trying to figure out what place we have in the world and what kind of individual impact we can make. And that's really all I can talk about because so much of it is spoilers. Like, it's even spoilers to the main character herself because she doesn't remember who she is. So, sorry about that. And, okay, now I want to chat about some very hyped books that I read. And I have some thoughts about them. The first one, I have three. So, the first one is Shatter Me, which, note for warning for anyone who hasn't read Shatter Me, it might just be me at this point. I read it as a library copy. And at 70%, the book ends. So at 70%, they give like a teaser, or maybe they give the novella for Destroy Me, which is a novella afterwards. I was really, really taken aback. I did not think that that was going to happen. So I'm like reading and I'm like, okay, whatever. I have 25% more. And I don't. It just full on ends. And I don't know if that experience really makes me think about how I felt about the book as a whole. But I was pretty upset. And I was like, how can they do this to us? Not like upset in a betrayed, oh my God, that ending, but in a way that it just felt like it just ended at the end of a chapter, but didn't end at the end of an arc, if that makes any sense. In general, the writing style for me, for Shatter Me, I don't know if it was necessarily one that I vibed well with. There are a lot of secrets also that the main character is keeping. Those work with me sometimes, sometimes not. But I think also the writing style just felt very much like a product of his time, which is fine. I think if I read Shatter Me when it came out, I would have liked it a little bit more. To me, also, I thought Shatter Me was gonna be like sci-fi, basically, based on what I had seen and based on the levels of like the propaganda, I guess, that you're being told about in relation to Shatter Me. And in reality, there's more of a fantasy vibe to it. I don't mind speculative fiction mashups. I love those actually. But it is a little bit of like a mismatch expectations. Also, I feel like all I ever heard about was Juliet and Warner. And so I was deeply confused, and I still am, honestly, after finishing Shatter Me. So let me know down below if I should continue onwards, because I just feel all sorts of very strange, confusing feelings after finishing that one. So in November, I read If We Were Villains, mostly because I wanted to have a dark academia fall, and this has been on it a lot. There are some references and some word choices which I found very problematic. But in general, I don't know how I feel about this one because I really have just finished it very, 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 very recently. In general, though, one of my things is that I feel like I need to have more familiarity with Shakespeare than I do. I would say I'm like mid into Shakespeare in the terms of, I've read a lot of the plays, I've seen a lot of the productions, I know a lot about some of the plays I haven't read. But this to me was like, I feel like if someone went through, and I'm sure they already did, and took every line that they quote randomly and put them down, then I would enjoy knowing a little bit more about the context, because I cannot imagine what I'm missing there. I do like the layers of suspense that we have, and in some ways it feels very classic in the way that it's super Shakespeare heavy. And it also employs this kind of frame narrative each time. Each one is very much theater and play centered. It is not at all what I expected. I feel like what I expected was kind of a dark academia thriller. And while it definitely is, definitely dark academia in the sense of maybe like vibes so far, but not really true to the nature of, in my opinion, dark academia, which kind of helps break down and explore the systems of power within academia and within kind of elitism. This to me is like vibes only in terms of dark academia. Like there's sort of the idea of ambition being this force that is all powerful and also a bit corrupting. We have kind of like so I this has also been recommended or comped to a lot to The Secret History, like both of those vibes, and I definitely see that because you have this kind of elite academic institution. You have a main character who is kind of like the odd one out in that sense. He is coming from a position where he doesn't have that much elite power, specifically money and prestige, as the other characters. I don't really know how I feel yet about this. If you're interested in my more coherent thoughts, leave a comment down below, and I can kind of piece together more. I haven't written the review, which is why all of these ideas are still kind of percolating, I guess. I finished this one just before filming, which is why I'm kind of just like reeling. But yeah, I don't know how I feel, except this was not what I expected. Not necessarily in a bad way, because I enjoyed this one way more than The Secret History. But I think that some of the promises that were made to me about this kind of fell a bit short, if that makes any sense. And finally, I read Intermezzo. This is my first Sally Rooney. Just want to preface that. This is my first Sally Rooney, and I don't know if this writing style is for me. At the beginning of the book, I would say the first 100 pages, I had a really hard time. This is super stream of conscious narrative, but also there's no dialogue markers, like within, like, there's no quotation marks, which really frustrated me, and I had a hard time with that. Kind of figuring out, okay, are you actually saying this? Are you not saying this? Maybe that's the point. But for me, I was trying to read this as kind of like a chapter a day, fun read. I was reading this with a few other people in a book club, and it just took so much effort to read, which is okay. Not saying that's not okay. It just wasn't what I was expecting. Specifically as well because I had seen a lot of Sally Rooney's film or things adapted into films or TV shows. I don't know how this would work in a film or TV show just because this is so internal narration, internal thought driven. That's normally what I love in a book. I normally need more character introspection than I get. This, I had it all. That was not a complaint for me. But yeah, I don't know. I feel sometimes like part of why I had a hard time with Intermezzo was on purpose. Maybe it's on purpose that we don't really know sometimes what we're saying out loud and what we're thinking. As well, the paragraphs are just really long. Here, can I just show you one? This is all one paragraph. So, from a kind of basic structure point, there were a few things that I was really struggling with. I continued to struggle with them throughout the whole book. The dialogue thing I started to get used to, but the whole long paragraphs was really hard for me. I don't know if this one is any different or similar to Sally Rooney's previous books, so let me know down below if it is. But I just feel like this, I had to be very much in the exact right headspace to tackle page long, if sometimes more paragraphs, to tackle really being like, okay, did you say this? Did you not say this? What are you saying? In general, in terms of story, I did like it. I thought it was going to be heavier on the theme exploration than it wasn't. In terms of the plot, it's a pretty straightforward plot, and it's pretty straightforward interactions between everyone, specifically the brothers. I thought there was going to be a lot more dealing with the nitty gritty of the brothers, and to me, some of those elements were pretty shallow. I was really looking for like the brothers to really delve deeper into it. Like a lot of conversations I thought were going to happen didn't happen. And so maybe that's a little bit more truer to real life, and maybe this is not as dramatic as I thought it was going to be. Basically, it's a bit quieter as well. Not a criticism, just an observation. It's a bit quieter than I expected, and for all the chess iconography that you see here, chess isn't that much of a big deal. I feel like I've been seeing that everywhere with Intermezzo, chess. And while it is an aspect of one of the main characters, I think Ivan, yeah. Ivan is trying to be like a chess person or is competing in chess competitions, but it's like not as much of a big thing as I was expecting based on the cover. And so, yeah, I mean, there are some really beautiful small notes or small things, small comments between the brothers that I really did enjoy. But in general, this one managed to be very long, pretty quiet, and weirdly difficult to get through some of it because of the long paragraphs. So in general, also, like, I don't know truly how I feel about this. I also haven't written the review for this. I'm so behind on reviews. Don't even talk to me about that. But yeah, if you've read this, please let me know down below because I want to talk about this more, I think. Anyway, those are my final thoughts about November, and I will see you at the end of the wrap up for December, where like I honestly don't know. Manifesting a more diverse December for me. Also, I'm like dreading so much the end of the year wrap ups, but it's in my schedule. I made the schedule plan for December and some of January, and it's in there. It's in the wrap up schedule, or it's in the schedule, but like I'm not looking forward to it. Okay, see you in the next one. Bye.